everyone, welcome to my video, which is Colour with a Pop, Whizz and Medi-Bang, which is part of the Thought Bubble Digital Fringe Festival 2020. In this video, I'm going to be sharing some of my own personal colour tips and tricks here in Medibang Paint Pro. So, just so we're not complete strangers with one another going into this, my name is Katie Marie. I'm 23 years old and I'm a recent animation graduate. I go by the Conjouress on both Twitter and Instagram. So if after the video you like my work or you like the sound of my voice or whatever the reason is, I'll be putting the links to both those pages in the description. So feel free to come check me out or come and say hello. It'd be great to see some of you. So for those of you that aren't aware of Medibang Paint Pro to begin with, it's a completely free, which is fantastic, art program which is aimed primarily at beginner digital artists to professionals alike, and specifically great for comic art creators. It's highly recommended for us. I primarily myself want to go into visual development and comic art, so this app is fantastic for practice and actually just creating some really cool pieces. So what I've done here to start off with is, to save the hassle, I've already sketched and done the line work for this piece to show off a couple of effects. For the anime nerds among us, as I am sure there are plenty, like myself, you might recognise that I've drawn Ochako Uraraka from My Hero Academia, otherwise known as Uravity. I kind of leapt at the chance to draw her as I'm a huge fan of the series and I can pronounce words today. Specifically her character, I think she defies a lot of tropes, especially in shonen anime, and it's just so great to see. So how I'm going to do this video is I've got some example layers set up here in the side where I will show you a couple of odd effects. I was going to do background effects originally, but for sake of time limits, I'm going to shut those on and show you more sort of the basic sides with the character. So if I go ahead and I will switch the background on here and the bolder effects here. So as you can see, it looks a bit misshapen. Don't worry, this is going to completely change. Right, so let's get cracking on. So to start with colour, I like to go in with block colours first. So to do this, I primarily use the paint bucket tool, which is just over here on the side, as you can see, as it's tipping out a load of paint, which is unsafe, but there you go. I use that, so you just click on that there, and then obviously you can select whatever colour you want in the boxes here. Just drag that up and down until you find the ones that you like. So for those of you that do watch the series, Uraka's superhero outfit is pink and black. As you can see with the background, it's going to be quite a sort of a space theme. And then she has the brown skin and brown hair and light skin. I can do English today, I do apologise. So an effect with this that I quite like to do is over here. So if you see at the top, there's an effect called close gaps. Now what this does is sometimes when you do colour in block areas, when you've done line work, you can get little white edges inside, or sometimes it will bleed out, depending on how you've drawn whatever it is you're drawing. So to solve this, you go onto these little blue boxes here and you make sure it's on full. But sometimes you can divert from this. So if you've got like a bigger area, I would say go on to the full. If you've got a small area, go on to say 3 or 4. Because sometimes if you've got smaller areas and you do too much of a fill, it can bleed into the line work, which can be quite annoying. It takes away from the effect. So for sake of example, I've got it on full here, and when I did do the block work on my finished layers here, you get something a bit like this. As you can see, oh, the hair is missing. Wherever has that gone? Well, I've got the answer to that. I tend to do the hair on a separate block layer because there's quite a cool effect you can do with this. So with the hair, you do the same thing here, use the paint bucket tool, and you would fill in the hair like so. A little trick as well, if I go and switch on the hair layer that I did earlier, I have way too many layers. Please do not worry about this. This is just my intricate and messy process. So you've got the block hair on like so. But the trick here, sometimes when you fill in, especially when you've got more sort of finer details, like say corners or sharp edges, especially with hair, I have this problem. You will just go in with a pencil on a really small size, and you can just fill in the edges. I know it's pink, but there you go. See, there you go. If it's a character, should she have pink streaks in her hair? Let me know in the comments what you think. So like so you can fill in the edges quite easily without it bleeding or going all over the place. A little trick with the brushes as well, you can see on the edges here you've got a variety of different numbers. These are the brush sizes. So to change these, all you have to do is go over back to the layers and you select this here, brush size, and then you've got a huge variety of different sizes. As you can see as I drag it across on the face, you can see the brush size gets considerably bigger. It depends on whatever it is you're doing with your particular drawing or piece. For sake of example, for the corners you use a smaller brush. So after that, this helps a lot with shadow and dimensions, specifically on the hair. It's quite a natty trick that I quite like to use. So to do this effect, you just create a separate layer. As you can see here, I've got a gradient layer. So I'm going to just switch off the effect that I use. So you can see it's a normal layer. You put it above the hair, and then you select this section up here called clipping. And what this does is it clips that layer to the layer underneath. So whatever you draw will only affect that layer, which is really cool and really quite handy. So to do that effect, you use the gradient tool here, and you just drag it up like so. Use a darker, I would recommend using a darker one for like underneath, and then using a lighter gradient on the top. It depends again where your light source is coming from, because that's also quite an important thing to consider. But for sake of example, if I switch on my clipping layer, you get something a bit like this. Also something to remember when you're doing a gradient with the hair, you go up to this little box here called type. It should come up with this. You just click on it and make sure it says foreground transparent. If you do foreground background or transparent foreground, you get quite a weird sort of light effect. It takes away a lot of the colour, so make sure it's set to that. And then after that you start to go in with sort of the finer details. So for example, I will start with the skin, because that's quite the lengthy part of my process specifically. So with this we start to go into like the different brushes, which is always a fun part for me. But before that, just remember I like to do the little details, say on the eyes, on the mouth first, on a separate layer, because if you start doing the skin and then you go quite hard on the eyes and the nails, it can all get messed up, especially when you start doing other effects. So make sure those are on a separate layer if you don't want those to get completely ruined. So what I do for that specifically really quickly is, as you can see right about here, I've got the eyes and the shine on the eyes and the lips, as they're all separate. So what I like to do for the eyes and the lips, I'll switch that on. As you can see, that's already quite three-dimensional already, is I use an effect on the blending called multiply, and this is quite good for both hair and skin and clothes. It's a really good shading tool. And for the eyes, I go in a little circular motion. You don't have to use the paint bucket tool for the smaller things. I find it quite fiddly personally, and you can just go in with a simple pen tool and scribble in whatever you want. So you do that. I tend to use like a light grey for the shadows in whites specifically, because it just looks a lot better, especially if you're doing more sort of cartoon style. And then for the shine in the eyes, I use different effects, so I have them on separate layers. So for the lips, especially for hello, yep, I'll accept the risk right now, thank you very much. For the lips, I like to use a thing called Add, and I'll switch that on so you can see it there. Add is quite good for any hard light, so on the lips specifically, it creates quite a glossy effect, which I quite like. I use it on both guys and girls and all the creatures of the universe that I draw. And that's quite good there. It doesn't quite work with the eyes though, so I'll show you an example of this. So if I go in with the pen on an Add, it does create like a white sort of effect, which can be nice, but I find it a bit too flat. So what I tend to do for that is an effect called overlay. An overlay is basically really good for soft light. As you can see there, switching it on, it kind of blends into the eye a lot more, gives it a lot more dimension. So I recommend using that on primarily the skin, I would say. On the hair, hair tends to be quite shiny, so I use the Add for that. Speaking of the skin, however, I'll move on to that. So for the skin, it's probably the most lengthy part of my process, as you've got to figure out where the light is coming from, what shades to use, etc. One thing I will say specifically about the skin is obviously do set it to multiply, but this is a mistake that I made when I first started out with digital. So some people tend to use the eyedropper tool. This is quite a good tool anyway. Especially specifically if you want a certain colour that you've used before and you can't quite find it, you just take this and you tap an area of colour and it will pop up here, and you can just grab it and use it wherever you want, which is really handy. Well, it saves you looking for all the little numbers for a very specific colour, which I made the mistake of when I started digital. So do not worry, this saves you so much hassle. But to set up another layer as well while I'm at it, you just go onto layers and you go onto this little paper icon down here, and in the corner over there you should see it says Add Layer. So you just tap that and voila, you've got another layer. I also find it really handy as well. If you tap on this, you can change the name of your layers. This helps stop you getting really confused when it comes to that, because I tend to have that effect, especially with the amount of layers that I bleed and use in my work. So example shading, we'll have that and we'll set that to multiply. So the mistake that I made was using the same colour as the base, only because as you can see there, it's very, very light and it looks quite flat. Don't freak out too much though. Depending on your style, this can actually work really well. But I would say use the base, so you find that base and then you drag it down a bit for cell shading, and this should already look 10 times better with that, and that's really good for cell shading. For those of you that don't know what cell shading is, it's quite an effective and easy way to shade. You draw outlines onto the skin and you colour it in, and it creates like sort of more hard edge. It's used a lot for comic creators. As you can see there, it's actually quite a nice effect. But I'll get rid of that, because the effect that I primarily use for my work is quite airbrushed and more sort of three-dimensional. If you want to do this effect, what I recommend is not shading like I've just done with the cell. I tend to use orange hues a lot because it's quite warm for the skin. A trick with this as well, depending on what colour you've done the skin, whether it's fair to dark skin to blues and greens and purples, whatever it is, I always start with an orange base. The lighter the skin, I would say the lighter the orange should be. To do this, I start out with the pen tool. I know I've said it for cell shading, but to start off with, it's good to sort of mark out where you want the areas of light to be. So for sake of example, the light for her is going to come from underneath from the glowy effects on her hands. So to do this, you can look up a lot of references for light here, but for sake of example, for underneath, I tend to draw a U shape on here over her cheekbones, and then a little bit on the chin. Something that I missed as well, when you're doing it from underneath, is to not shade in the eyelids. I thought this was quite weird as well when I started doing this, but it ended up working out really well. And there's also a little bit of high bone at the top of the nose as well. And then you can block colour this as well, which is quite cool. So for sake of example, you can also go in with the pencil for the smaller areas, so don't worry about me, I'm just showing this as an example. And also under the neck as well, as you can see, it already creates quite a nice set of light. Then to do the dark areas, because this is quite flat on its own, I go for purples. I find that oranges and purples are quite good for skin, as they're quite warm colours contrary to popular belief. And then I go in with a different brush called the watercolour brush. And this is quite soft brush, so I recommend it a lot for skin, but I do it after I've done this. And you'll see why in a moment. So I'll go in a darker area, so like the inner parts of the ear, and I would say just under the cheekbones as well, a bit on the chin, definitely underneath the face. That's a heavy amount of shadow there. Probably around where she's got the hair as well. Don't worry too much about it being overly sort of intricate at this point, because you can just go in with the eraser brush once you've done all the fancy effects and just get rid of it. It's quite an easy thing to do. So don't worry about mine looking quite sloppy. I tend to be quite intricate with mine. This is just to show you how it's done. So there we go, for example. And then if you want to do even heavier after that, I tend to go in with quite a dark red. So for example, underneath the chin, where the shadows are much heavier. You don't have to do this every time, but if you want if you've got an intense amount of light, or you just want to create an even heavier dimension, this is a really good trick to use. These are all quite warm colours and work really well together. Then after this, to create that sort of softer effect, I use the other watercolour brush here called Watercolour Wet, and this is even softer than the watercolour brush. And for this, you do use the base, as you're going to use it more as like a blending tool. And then you just go along any edges, make sure you keep going in the same direction. Also go in here, because it is the base of the skin, so don't worry about it turning a different colour. There is a reason for this. So anywhere where there's an edge, just go in and sort of blend that in. As you can see, it's already starting to look a bit more three-dimensional, like so. And then the final trick here is to use something called the blur tool. This blurs everything together. And I tend to use a larger size brush for this, so around a 70, because if you do use a smaller blur tool, it doesn't blend as well, it just looks really harsh, and this creates more of an airbrushed effect. So then you go in and you blur the edges together like so. And as you can see, it's already looking really nice. Already looks a lot more sort of skin-like. If you've got any edges that bleed over that you can see in the hair, you can just go and easily erase those. It won't go onto any other layer, which is really nice to have. And there you go with the shading. You can do that on any part of the body, but the face is probably one of my favourites to do, because you can create so many effects with that. If you're not quite happy with the colours that you have selected and you don't want to go back in and judge it all up and get it all wrong, you can go onto the filter selection here, and you've got two tools I like to use called levels and hue. Tone curve you can use as well, but it's a little bit more fiddly, and levels basically does the exact same thing. So levels, you can change the brightness and the dullness of the skin, especially you can use this on any layer as well to change it. So if I play about with this, if you drag this up, the colours become a lot more intense, and if you drag it all the way back down, they become a lot softer. Same goes with the output. If you drag it that way, it's like the reverse of the input. And it all depends on the effect you want to create. You've also got these little ones here, and that just changes the intensity or whatever it is you want to do. And sometimes you can get some really cool lighting effects on here. It all depends on your source of light. And then with the hue, it's exactly what it says on the tin. You can change the hue of the colour by dragging it. As you can see, it changes it quite drastically. It all depends on what you want to do. Everyone has their own individual style, otherwise we would not be such a great and diverse art community. As you can see, oh, that's quite a green effect there, but I'll stick with that. You can also change the saturation, so you can make it duller or you can make it brighter, and same with brightness, that can really change it. This is what I use to shade my skin, so I changed the brightness so it created more of a darker effect, because the bulbs I used on her hands are quite intense, so it creates this effect. I'm not going to clean that up because I've got an example ready to show you once I've shown you how to do the lighting. So the lighting on this, I'll create an extra layer for that, and I won't bother naming it because I've just told you what I'm going to be doing with that. To do different kinds of lighting, I would say overlay is really good for soft light, which is what I primarily use to do a lot of skin effects. So for this, I use the airbrush tool. I remember using airbrush tool a lot when paint was a thing on Microsoft Office, and everybody used to do graffiti with it. But now it's actually really good for skin effects. So I tend to use a larger brush for this, again for the same reason I use a larger blur brush with the skin. It just creates a much softer and less harsh effect. With overlay, you can change the colours a lot with this, and it should create some really nice effects. So since the orbs in her hands are pink, I will use a pink. As you can see here, you just blend it into the edges of where the light is. As you can see, it's already creating quite a nice soft shine effect. And this is quite nice to use. And if you want to do harsher light, you go for the add. So you go onto the add here. And for this, you can use a smaller brush because you do want that sort of harsh edge. And then, for example, I like to sometimes blend these together. So I will blend the soft with the hard, because sometimes you get areas of hard light. So you just go in, say on the nose is quite an area of harsh light. Mine is very sloppy. I'm not usually this sloppy, but it's really good just to show you an example. As you can see there, you've got the areas of harsh light. You can see the lips have already been done. And then after that, you can blend this as much as you want, or you can use one or two effects, whatever it is you want to do. Go creative, go nuts. So my example, if I switch all those off, and I'll zoom out to show you this. Whoop, whoop, there we go. Down here, so my skin shading was quite dark because I changed the hue, and then the lighting was very pink. As you can see, I've done it a lot around the hands with the airbrush tool, and along here you can see I've done the harsh edges on the nose and the neck, just to create a more sort of realistic effect. With the hair, it's a bit more simple, I find. I also use the multiply tool for this, and you can do the same effect as you would with cell shading, you pick the base and then you drag it down to a darker colour, and then you shade in where the areas of hair on here. For her, I kind of go the other direction. I tend to use I change the hue after it's been done, because sometimes it feels a bit flat, and for this, for example, this is actually purple under here, which is incredible, and it still creates a really dynamic shadow effect. And then with the hair, a lot of hair, especially on girls, is really shiny. So I use the add effect, but the difference is here, if I show you, it's a lot lighter, as you can see on there. And if you don't like how harsh a layer is, you can do this with any layer, is you change the opacity. So if I was to change the opacity on the hair back up to full, as you can see, it's nice, but it's a bit harsh and it doesn't feel as three-dimensional. So I tend to change it and drag it down to there, and it just looks a lot more realistic, and you can see sort of the colour tone underneath. As you noticed, when I go back onto full, it just looks a bit more white and a bit more blocky. So if you drag that down, you can use any colour and it has this really nice shine effect. With the hair as well, I tend to find that I get a lot of my inspiration for my work from like 90s and noughties animes. I'm a huge fan, so I tend to look into that style as a reference for hair. So for the bigger areas of hair, so like on the top of her head, for big chunks of hair like here and here, I'll do a slope, I'll draw a slope there, and then I'll draw opposite that and fill that in. Same goes for here. I tend to do like a sort of a smooth, so follow the direction of her hair and where her hair goes. That's my biggest tip for doing that. And then for other areas of hair, you can do like an edge sign, like down here. You can do the more simple edges, or you can do like this sort of scribble effect as well, and sort of try to vary the lines there as it just looks more realistic. Creates sort of a Sailor Moon effect. If any of you have watched Sailor Moon, you can see how dramatic their hair is, especially with the shading. And then after that, if you really want to go more sort of realistic, I do extra strands of hair, and I love doing this. It just polishes it all off. So I do this right above everything else. As you can see here, I've got the hair strands layer. So this is also add, and you use a really thin brush for this. I tend to go for like a size 3 or 2 with this. And switch that on there. As you can see, it just adds another depth of hair, adds another layer. It just makes it pop off a bit more. But as you can see, I'll just show you as an example. So I've got it on quite a thin one here. Have I got it on a thin one? She says. She does not. I put it on a size 3. And then you just drag it. Depending on what tablet you have as well, if you've got a pressure sensitive one, it can actually be quite handy for this, as you can, if you press lightly, you get quite a thin effect, but if you press a bit heavier, you get something a bit like that. So you can really play around with that, which I always find quite fun. So zoom back out on there, and as you can see, it already looks a lot better. Now on to, I find this the more sort of difficult part, which is the clothes, but you can also create so many cool effects with this. So to start off with, I'm just going to pop on the shading, which is also multiply and add. With add as well, specifically on this, if I went back up to that, it can look alright. It depends what your preference is, I would say, with that. This looks quite good, but I prefer putting it on a lower opacity because it just looks more realistic. So I'll pop that on there. Always try to remember as well where the light source is. Depending on the effects you want to do, I'll just run you through, especially on like her boots and her belt and her cuffs and her helmet as well. So I tend to use a lot of circular shading, can be quite effective. But if you want to do sort of a metallic effect or more sort of a solid effect, say like on her neckerchief and the buttons here, I tend to vary the lines up. So you do like a block effect like that, and you just create little lines. It looks more sort of rounded. If you just do like a flat shade, it doesn't pop off quite as much. So as you can see here, you just make sure you follow the shape of whatever you've drawn. Use references for light. I cannot stress this enough. It's so important. But look for where the light hits. For metallic, vary the line sizes. So you've got like a thin and then a block. Make sure there's space between it. It's not just line after line after line. It just looks really flat. And then say with circular areas like say the neck or her belt, I use a lot of circular shapes, and you can go nuts with this. Just make sure, again, look where the light is hitting. With the helmet as well, same goes for that. Because her headpiece is quite a unique shape, this one was a bit tricky for me to start off with. Just make sure you follow sort of the curves of that. And also with lighting, don't go too nuts with it, I would say. Lighting does not need to be everywhere, otherwise it will just look very flat. So make sure where you put your light makes sense, if that makes sense to you. And now I'm going to show you probably my favourite bit of this, which is the textures. So with this, I'm going to show you it on the pink areas of Uraraka's suit. So I'm going to demo this so you can see the full effect. So if I go back up to here and go onto the texture, I layered my textures quite a bit. This is going to show you a bit of a glittery effect, which I use so much because I'm just addicted. So with close texture, I use burn with this, which is very similar to multiply, but it makes more of a darker effect. With this, I use a thing called the stipple pen, and the stipple is quite a grainy brush. And I make this a really large size, so I would go for a 500. Do not freak out about the brush size, this is going to make sense, I promise. So I use a darker pink for this. That would help if I switch the layer on, there we go. And you just go in like this, and you just press on as much as you want. Try not to go too heavy, because you're going to be layering these. You start with that, and then you can just erase the sides. That would help if I set my brush to a smaller one. This is a thing I run into quite a lot with this, is I forget to change the brush sizes between the eraser and the pen, as they do share it. So don't worry about that. It is easy to get the hang of, but I do slip up sometimes, so don't worry about that too much. But you can just erase the sides, so the effect just stays in the area you want it to stay in. And then I won't erase the rest of that, just for time purposes. So to create the glitter effect after that, I go for an add with this, and I used white to create the stipple. So if I go on with that, as you can see, it's already making quite a nice glittery effect. And with the burn underneath, it looks more three-dimensional. You can just use the glitter as is, but I have quite a mixed sort of 2D and 3D blend when I do my work, so I like to add that underneath. So I'll switch those off, and I will show you that finished effect, which is here. Oh, also I did an additional tool for doing this, is quite a girly brush, but I love it, is the sparkle brush, and you can add this on top. So I'll just use it as an additional on the textures. I do this on the glittery on the top, otherwise it won't look entirely correct. So you can dab that in, as you can see, quite a nice sort of glitter effect there. You can change the colours of this and the effects, it's all up to you. I would say just play around with all of these. All of these have different effects on them. This is just my personal preference. By no means do you have to copy my style or anything like that. I would say experiment to your heart's content with that. but that's quite a nice effect to use. As you can see, it looks quite shiny and it looks different to the other areas of her suit as well. So I would say really play around with textures, it's so important. As you can see there, it's already starting to look a bit more complete, but we can do even more with this. So on to the final effect. As you can see, I've just switched on the additional shading. I tend to do several layers of shading, especially with the clothes, as it just creates more dimension. But again, experiment to your heart's content, it is all up to you. Go forth and find your style. So the last effect I'm going to show you here, I tend to use this a lot with fantasy work and all that kind of jazz, anything to do with magic and superpowers and all the nerdy things of the universe. So I'm going to show you how to do a glow effect. To do this, specifically, I like to do it a lot with a circle. So I will show you here as an example. So if I go onto the hands, as you can see where the glow is going to be, and you go up to this little icon here, this little circle with lots of little dots on it, and as you can see, this pops up. So what you do is you drag this out and it creates a circle effect, and you can change the size of this. You can make it smaller like that, or you can crush it, or you can squeeze it, whatever you want to do. But this helps you not just here, but it helps you with any circular bits in line work as well. If you struggle to draw curves, solid curves like I do, as you can see, like round here, it's really helped the suit to get that smooth edge. So what I do here, I use the pen tool for this, but you can use any for this. Pen's really good for what I'm going to do, so that's what I'm going to use. It would help if I switch that on yet again. She needs to remember her layers, she says. And I'll use probably a size 7. And as you can see, it really helps you draw a nice effect. Like so. And you don't have to draw the full circle as well. That's quite good with this, as you can stop wherever you need it. And then I will use a bit of the stipple, because it is magical. But I'll use a smaller brush for this, just because it's a smaller area, and because it's going to glow, it won't be as prominent. As you can see, I just add that in. Looks quite nice. And then I will use the odd sparkle. It is quite good on 100 as well, because you can just dot that in like so. So once you've done that and you've got your area of glow set up, what you do is duplicate this layer, and there's a reason for this. So if you go onto layer and you can select duplicate, and it will create this again, but you change the effect of this second one. So you change it to add, because it's used for quite harsh light. So as you can see, it's already made it a lot brighter. But then you go on to filter, and this time you go a bit lower down and you select Gaussian blur. And what Gaussian blur does, make sure you have the preview on with this as well. There's a little preview icon just here. You can change how soft it is. So if the harsher you make it, the less it is. But the lower the value, as you can see, it goes like a bit softer like that. And that's the sort of effect that you want. And then after that, you just keep duplicating that second layer. As you can see, it depends how intense you want it. You can also lower the opacity. You can add more things to that. You can also play around a lot with the blending with this. You don't just have to keep it on add. It's important to have it on that second layer, but afterwards you can go, I recommend soft light can be quite nice. You can even do overlay with this. Brightness is good. You can do all sorts of this. But I primarily like to keep it on add and then just lower the opacity, and it creates a really nice effect. As you can see, it's just changed. It looks so much better, especially with the pink airbrush underneath. So after doing that, if I switch that off, and I'll whip out the ones I made earlier. So I did 3 for this one. So I created a large area. Then I did an airbrush on a side. It all depends what effect you want to use. And then duplicated that again with that. So it just looks a lot bigger and a lot nicer. And yeah, that is all the effects that I can show you today, especially with her. And then I'm just going to throw on the extra sparkles. These can be quite good for backgrounds, especially because her outfit I find is very sort of space themed, so I really wanted to add in sort of a galaxy effect in the back. So yeah, this is the finished piece. Thank you so much for checking into this little tutorial. It's my first time doing this, so I was a bit nervous going in, but I've actually had so much fun. Like I said at the start of the video, I will put the links to both my social media platforms at the Conjouress in the description below. And what I'm also going to do is put a link to the Medibang website where you can download it. It is completely free, and hopefully you can experiment as much as I have here, and hopefully some of these tricks are going to help you. So yeah, I hope to see some of you soon, and maybe I'll do more videos, who knows. So thank you for coming to my little nerdy art tutorial. Thank you very much. Goodbye.